Hello everyone and welcome to Ushanka Digest. Ushanka Digest is the collection of my stories covering the same topic, so if you like long videos, I believe you're gonna like Ushanka Digest. This video digest contains stories about military preparedness lessons in Soviet schools, military draft, dodging military draft, boot camps, and other interesting stories about military service in Soviet Union. Enjoy the show.
Здравствуйте, дорогие товарищи! В эфире снова программа Ushanka Show. Всем привет! Усаживайтесь поудобнее. Сегодня интересная история.
Вы смотрите программу Ushanka Show.
Just a friendly reminder that my book American Diaries is available on Amazon.com or shoot me an email if you would like to have a signed copy. Thank you. So today we're going to talk about НВП. Начальная военная подготовка. It can be translated as initial military preparedness. That's direct translation, but it would be like initial military training. But before we can talk about НВП, we need to have a little refresher about the Soviet schools. We didn't really have things like here in America, have a middle school, high school, and it's quite often separate buildings. Usually, at least in the Soviet cities, school will be one single building, and younger classes, like from first to third class, will be like in a separate wing. Otherwise, it's all going to be mixed up. So high schoolers and middle schoolers are going to be just walking same corridors, going to the same similar classes, but of course, different teachers and different subjects, but we all were in the same building. Another huge difference, we didn't mix our kids. Like here in America, it kind of drives me nuts a little bit that every new year my kid starts, his class is totally different, so they rotate children. In Soviet Union, quite often, if you start the first grade, if you didn't move to a different city, if you start the first grade, you will finish the school with the same children. So they didn't change classes. You have the same maybe 20 kids or 30 kids that you start at the first grade, and you just go through every grade till the 10th with the same children. And the only time when you had this change with kids in your class will be after finishing the 8th grade. So that's kind of similar to the middle school. So the 8th grade, so kids went to school at the age of 7, so plus 8, so the age of 15. 8th grade is when the ones that couldn't keep up really well with poor grades, they will leave school and they go to trade schools or just go straight to work. And the smartest kids will continue for 2 more years, 9th and the 10th grade, and then you have a full kind of school education. So in case of my school in Kiev, we had 4 8th grade classes, and usually there would be a letter attached, so you were 8A or B or C or D, A, B, V, G, D. So I was in the 8B class, and then after kids left, and it's pretty much teacher would recommend to parents like, hey, your kid is not smart enough pretty much to continue education. He probably should go and join trade school. We had pretty much 50% people left. So out of 4 8th grade classes, we had only 2 classes left, A and B, kids who went to the 9th grade. So that's kind of similar to high school. So that was quite a shock to me because, I was with the same children from the 4th grade because we moved from our small apartment to our new 3-room apartment, and I was in different areas, so I had to join different school. So from the 4th grade till 8th grade, so for 4 years, I had same friends, same children in my class, and suddenly, there's the brand new kids. I kind of knew them, but we never were hanging out. So that was quite a I wouldn't say shock, but unusual situation. Would suddenly have totally different kids in your class. And also, besides new kids, we had new subjects in the 9th grade. And one of the subjects is the topic of this video, Начальная военная подготовка, initial military preparedness, or we just call it НВП by the first letters of this subject. We had this lesson twice a week. So this is the photo of my дневник, my daily school planner. This is actually from the 10th grade. So as you see, НВП was my second lesson on Mondays. And also it was another NVP class on Fridays. And here my scorecard for the 9th grade. So as you see, we had 4 quarters, and I circled in red начальная военная подготовка, initial military training. So that was actually already pre-printed in the scorecards, and I scored quite poorly. The best grade is 5, excellent. So I had second quarter was bad. I had 3, which is satisfactory, which is not that great. It's like C. But we had the teacher who was quite horrible. I didn't like him, and quite often teacher affects how your attitude towards the school, right, or towards the class. NVP was quite different from any other class we had. We even had to have a different uniform. In Soviet schools, we always had to wear uniforms. But in case of military training, my parents had to buy me this khaki color dress shirt, which you could buy it's like a military surplus stores, they call them. So everyone had to wear that khaki color shirt and a tie. So that was first thing that was different. It's actually interesting because after I finished high school, my mother made me sleeveless button shirt out of that military shirt. So I had this NVP beater, I guess you can call it, like here in America they call sleeveless shirts wife beaters. I had this cool NVP beater that I liked a lot, and I wore it all the time. There's quite a few pictures of me that I'm sporting that cool looking shirt. Besides uniform, we also had a different kind of teachers. We actually had a retired military officer who was our teacher, and he had a different name, so we didn't call him a teacher. He was called военный руководитель. So you can translate it as like a military leader, pretty much, but we called him военрук. So it's the short for военный, воен, и руководитель, рук. So we always had военрук, and that was the actual military person that retired and got this job to train young school children to be ready for military service. So here you are, this actual picture of us at the NVP class, but this is the 10th grade, so we're talking about 1987, 1988. This is our военрук. He was a полковник, and I don't know how to translate to English his rank, so he was a high-ranking officer. He was very smart, very intelligent. We loved him a lot, and my grades actually went up in the 10th grade comparing with the 9th grade. But yes, this is our class during the NVP, initial military training. And look at the young comrade Sergey. I'm like, it hurts to see myself. No wonder I had a hard time to score with any girl in the 10th grade. My hair is just like, oh my God, it's just so bad. It's a separate topic about hair and hygiene in Soviet Union, but sad picture. And of course, we were provided with the NVP textbook that we used to study several specific topics. One of them was строевая подготовка, which is where you learn how to march. So that was the beginning of our military training. Is pretty much we will gather outside if the weather is nice, or in the basement in the school when we had this little shooting range, and we'll be drilled about turning left, turning right, about face, and stuff like that. So налево, turn left, направо, turn right, кругом, about face, turn around, and шагом марш, start marching, раз, два, три. So that was all this kind of techniques, and then how you turn left while you're marching, how you turn right while you're marching. So that was quite grueling and boring, but we had to do that. Next subject was огневая подготовка. So that's like handling weapons. That was more fun, of course. It's included assembling and disassembling AK-47. That's my class did. Depending what year people were going to school, They had a different weapons. Then we had actual shooting like with the BB guns down in the basement of our school. And as a grand finale in the 10th grade, in the end of school, we actually had a field trip to the local military base on the outskirts of Kiev, and everyone had to shoot AK-47. So I did that too, so that was pretty neat. Next subject was tactical training, and that was more about, how do you move groups of soldiers, how do you go into looking for enemies, how you best way to mask yourself in the woods, stuff like that. So that was not as heavy as marching or training with weapons, but we had to cover that too. Another subject was защита от оружия массового поражения. So this is dealing pretty much with aftermath of chemical or nuclear attack. So оружие массового поражения, that's like WMDs. And so we were learning how to put the gas mask properly, how to operate Geiger meter, then discussing the distances if the nuclear bomb explodes, where's impact zones and how to behave when you see the flash. And and we also had a medical training, so it's a basic how to help wounded person, how to properly, if you have a broken leg or broken arm, how apply tourniquet, how to fix the arm so it doesn't move. So this kind of basic medical training, we went through that too, how to apply bandages and stuff. One of the interesting outdoor exercises we had to do was throwing grenades. So we actually had this metal construction that if you look at it, it looks like a shape of a tank. It's pretty much, like you look tank coming your way. So it's pretty much, you see the kind of shapes of the tracks, and then the square on the top is the turret. But it was just a shape. So your job was to be in a foxhole on a specific set distance, and you need to throw the grenade, that aluminum dummy grenade, and you need to hit, like, in the football, they kick the ball and it needs to go between those two poles. Your grenade should go through the shape so you hit the tank. And in my class, one guy was so good, like he could throw a grenade from a far, far away and always score. He actually was sent to the all city competition for the best grenade throwers. I'm not sure if he took any medals from there, but yeah, he was really good. And we also had a grenade, dummy grenades to inspect, like our Vajenruk military leader will show you how, pull the pin, squeeze, hold that shebang before you toss the real grenade. And actually, I found out there were quite several cases when somehow by mistake they had a live grenade in the box. So this guy, Yuri Leonov, who was a Vajenruk in one of the schools, was explaining kids how the Soviet grenade, anti-personnel grenade works, called F1. So he was showing them, you squeeze the trigger, you pull the pin, and he said, in a real grenade, you'll hear this kind of like a chlapok, so it's like a little tiny explosion, and then a little smoke comes up, and then you have 4 seconds. But in these dummy grenades, training grenades, all you hear is just a click. So he squeezed the grenade, pulled the pin, and suddenly he heard this little tiny clap sound and the smoke, and he realized somehow the real grenade got mixed up with the dummy grenades. See, he has only 4 seconds, and he has a 26 kids sitting in class looking at him. And one option will be to toss the grenade through the window, but it's a school, so outside there were kids playing. So he pretty much laid the grenade and crawled over it and killed himself, protecting his children. And I believe not long ago in Kazakhstan happened similar story again. Somehow the real grenade got mixed in with the these dummy grenades for schools, and another Wayenruk died protecting children. From what I remember, everyone pretty much enjoyed the NVP class. First of all, because we had no homework, so that was nice. And there was something different to do. You had a different person teaching you, not just the regular teachers. And also I recall interesting detail in the 10th grade. Our Wayenruk, our military leader, was actually talking to each male student, not the ladies, because they didn't draft the girls to army, but everyone in class had to talk to him. And that's pretty much he was asking, like, is any like Navy or aviation, anything of your interest, if you get drafted into army, which direction would you like to go? And I remember at that time, for some reason, I wanted to join Navy so bad. I had this kind of romantic picture in my brain about being on some ship out in the ocean or the Mediterranean Sea and watch sunrises and sunsets. And also I'd like to mention, even those kids that left school after the 8th grade, they still had their military training if they joined trade school. So in ПТУ, профессиональное техническое училище, so that will be like trade school when you learn to be metal worker or whatever. They also had classes of NVP, so they also were getting ready for the military service. And of course, if you just went to work, that's the only way you would skip those classes, and then you just get drafted when you turn 18. Okay guys, well, I hope you enjoyed this video and maybe learned something new about life in the Soviet Union. As always, I'll appreciate if you like this video, share with your friends, and I'm always interested to read your comments. Just a friendly reminder that my book American Diaries is available on Amazon.com, or shoot me an email if you would like to have a signed copy. Thank you. So today we're going to continue our discussion about initial military training in the Soviet schools. This topic I covered quite in detail in my previous video, but there's a couple more things I need to cover. But first of all, let's refresh our Soviet terminology. We learned already about НВП, Начальная военная подготовка, Initial Military Preparedness. Those were classes that the Soviet pupils had to attend in the 9th and 10th grade. The next word is Wayenruk, военный руководитель, military leader. So that's the teacher, retired military officer that teaches children in school initial military preparedness, NVP. So in my previous video, video number 211 about initial military training in the Soviet Union, I told you about many fun things we had to do during those classes, but there is one more very important thing we had to do during NVP. In the 10th grade, I believe it was 10th grade, so that's the last year of Soviet high school. This is where we finish our education on the 10th grade. It was 10 years total. All the boys had to visit this one interesting place called Военкомат. Okay, so let's learn a new Soviet term, Военкомат, военный комиссариат. So Военкомат is a short form of военный комиссариат, military commissariat. So Военкомат, it's pretty much your military draft board office, but usually it's not office, it's a whole building where they were responsible for maintaining database of everyone who is a draft eligible, военнообязанный. So every district in the cities or out in the country had a Военкомат that maintained a database of all the males that eligible to go to army. So my school, number 254, was located in Svetoshina district of Kiev. So Kiev had like 5 districts, I believe. So we belong to Svetoshina district, and one day our Wayenruk, military leader, took our class to Военкомат for the medical examination. So of course, when you were a teenager in school, you are very happy to skip classes because that was whole day and experience something different. I mean, they provided us bus service where you just hop on the buses and they took us right straight to Военкомат. And I don't think there's much difference between medical examination for military service in America or in the Soviet Union. They check your eyesight, they check your lungs, they check your heart, They make you strip to your underwear. So they check your physical condition. They might, I don't remember if they took blood samples or not, but this whole shebang, you walk through from one doctor to another doctor, from one office to another office, and you just carry that little book. Then they put the notes about your health conditions. You probably guessed by now that I had a very poor eyesight. Like, it started going downhill from about the 5th or 6th grade, and by the 10th grade, I already was like -7, I think. So you could see my glasses really thick. So it's where they marked on my medical book that I'm almost like, I would say legally blind, but have a really poor eyesight and not really fit for the Army service. Okay, comrades, so now I have to warn you. We're gonna get into some detail that some people may would consider gross. So I hate to be a dick, but right now we're gonna talk about penises. So as a part of this medical evaluation, medical examination, one doctor or nurse, it could be cute nurse, will ask you to pull down your undies and then gonna check your privates. So they're gonna look at your penis, and some doctors will put the glove on and they will move it themselves, or they ask you to lift it and show it, and they ask you to turn around, bend over, and spread your butt cheeks. So, yes, quite embarrassing, especially if it's a female doctor or a cute female nurse. Okay, I warned you, getting a little bit gross details. So, if you want to know in depth Soviet society, you should know that most males in the Soviet Union, I'm talking like a European part, we weren't circumcised. Only Jewish and I think some nationalities out, like maybe Azerbaijanis, because of religion, they had to do circumcision, but most, like Ukrainians, Russians, Belarusians, Baltic states too, probably, we never been circumcised. So as a part of this embarrassing medical inspection, this cute female nurse can ask you to pull the skin back on your penis to expose the actual dickhead. And they check you for venereal diseases. So that would be kind of like, we had a lot of actually jokes on this topic when boys being asked, hey, pull the skin back on your penis so I can take a look what's going on there. And of course, if you're circumcised, you don't have to do it. You're all exposed already, right? But here's one story, and I'm not sure it was based on real events or a joke. So one guy, after doing pulling his skin back and forth, he got a hard-on. So doctor like, okay, dude, there's a glass with cold water. Help yourself. It will help you. So he grabs the glass of cold water because he's very embarrassed. He's in front of this doctors naked. So he takes a big gulp, and they're like, no, we meant you're supposed to put your penis in that glass to cool off your hard-on. He took a swig from that communal glass. Another joke, or as we call it, anecdote on this topic, is when the doctor was telling a guy to pull skin back and forth, and suddenly a dude ejaculated and hit the doctor right in the eye. I know it's horrible jokes, and the doctor wiping his eye, he's like, God damn it. He gonna be a sniper, send him to Afghanistan as a sniper. I think the topic of Voenkomat, military commissariat, the draft board office deserves a special separate video. So I won't get into details, but in the 10th grade, this is pretty much when all the male teenagers got into the system. Now they have their file, they have their medical conditions known, they have recommendations like from the Voenruk, how good this guy in military and what military service he wants to join. So by the time you graduate from high school, 10th grade, or from the trade school, military has all the information they need about you. Okay, guys, I hope you learned something new in today's video. And as always, don't forget to subscribe, like this video, share with your friends. Today we're gonna talk a little bit more about the military draft in the Soviet Union. I already touched that topic a couple of times, and the latest video was called First Steps of Becoming a Soviet Soldier. But first of all, let's refresh a couple of Russian terms. Voenkomat, which is a short form of военный комиссариат, military commissariat. So this is similar to draft office. Призыв. So this is a military draft. Призыв. Повестка. So this is the piece of paper that's being delivered. So that's so-called draft notice. So in 1967, the length of the military service in the Soviet Army was reduced from 3 years to 2 years. And in the Soviet Navy, ВМФ, Военно-морской флот, it was lowered from 4 years to 3 years. If you follow my channel, you may remember a story about my father's military service. He is a Soviet baby boomer. He was born in 1946, so he got drafted in 1964, I believe. So his service was supposed to be 3 years, but he kind of was right there in the middle of changing the terms. So he served like 2.5 years in the Baltics. He was a guard in a quite interesting top secret place. It was a KGB a listening station, and if you're interested, you can check it out my video about it. Okay, and now back to the military draft in the Soviet Union. It happened twice a year, in May, June, and then later in November, December. So we had two. They call it весенний призыв, spring draft, and then осенний призыв, fall draft. And every male that turned 18 was eligible to be drafted, and it lasted all the way till you turned 27. Of course, there were some ways that you could get a deferral from the military draft. One was if you're already married with 2 or more kids, which would be kind of impressive. You're 18-year-old dude and you already have 2 kids. Another exemption from the military draft you could get if you have very old parents that depend on you, so they are dependents. So if your father is older than 60 and your mother is older than 55 and they in such a poor health or shape that they depend on you for their income, for their food, then also you can get deferred from the military draft. Then, of course, if you have some kind of poor health conditions, or if you have a poor eyesight, maybe some issues with your lungs, so for medical reasons also you could get excused from the draft. Or, like if you're mentally unstable, something like that. And some of you probably can't wait to ask this question, that anyone from the Soviet boys ever tried to dodge the military service? And the answer, of course, a lot of kids did. I mean, you sacrifice 2 years of your prime time, you're 18, 19, and spend who knows where doing who knows what. So there were quite a few people that tried to dodge military service one way or the other. And by the way, I want to mention this kind of interesting detail. So when I was asking my father about his military service, suddenly he got emotional and told me and my brother, and none of us served in military. He said during his days, that was really not cool if you dodged the military service, because he said no girl would date you if she knows that you never served in military, because that means there's something wrong with you, or you handicapped mentally or physically. So that was not cool in the 60s to dodge the military service. But of course you need to keep in mind that my father was born and raised in a village in the western Ukraine, where pretty much all your future is working for a collective farm for free, just doing some really hard manual labor. So in that case, going out to military was probably a way better option than remaining in that village. Now, for the smart kids, the easiest way to avoid a military draft was to get accepted in specific colleges that had so-called военная кафедра, military department. So if you get to that college, then along with your education, you also do some military basic training. And when you get graduated as an engineer, for example, you also become a lieutenant of reserve. So that way you don't serve in army ever, but you become already an officer in reserve. For example, one of my friends, Igor, he really didn't want to go to military, so he went to the western Ukraine and got into the University of Oil and Gas in Ivano-Frankovsk. I believe at that time it wasn't called university, it was institute. And he never had any interest in drilling for oil or gas. But he figured out that that place was the easiest to get in, to pass entry exams. So he went there and he never went to the military. But of course, if you didn't get accepted, and usually there'll be, depending how popular is university, you may have 3, 4, 5 people trying to get in for every spot. So there's a lot of competition. And if you didn't score good enough, then военкомат and military will snatch you up pretty quick. 2 of my friends end up serving in the Soviet army that way. One guy went to Moscow trying to get into the University of International Relationship. And another one tried to get into medical institute to become a doctor, and they didn't pass through the entry tests, didn't score good enough, and next thing they went to the army for 2 years. Out of all my friends, I know only one that really actually wanted to go to the army, but he wanted to go to the paratroopers, to VDV, военно-десантные войска. So yeah, that's the only reason he wanted to go. He wanted to become, it's like a special forces almost at that time. They were the coolest military branch you can imagine. And he made it, and he served down in southern Ukraine, in Volgorod, as a part of Soviet paratroopers. I think I mentioned that before, that we really didn't have a choice where to go and what branch of army or navy to serve. So out of my friends, one guy ended up in navy, and he was in Vladivostok, so it's a far east of Russia. As I said, another guy was southern Ukraine in the paratroopers division. One guy ended up in Poland, and then one guy who didn't make it to the medical institute, he ended up serving in Moscow. One went to Belarus. So my father served in Baltics, in Latvia, I believe. So people were all over the place. So earlier I already talked a little bit about повестка, the draft notice. So these повестkas were delivered by hand, not by mail. And usually they utilized people that came for the medical test or whatever. Like it happened to me once. So after I was done with my paperwork and everything else in военкомат, that local officer guy asked me like, hey, so you live in this Leningradsky rayon, Leningrad region of Kiev area? And I'm like, yes. He's like, I have a couple of повестkas. I would like you to have it delivered. So I took those papers, and next day I rang the doorbell, and the guy opened the doors all smiling and happy. And I gave him повестка, said, congratulations, you got drafted, and that smile disappeared right away. So next step after you get your draft notice, there'll be a specific date that you need to show up at военкомат, at military commissariat. So of course then you're going to have a party, проводы. Your relatives and friends will get together and drink and party to say goodbye before you go to the military service. Then you show up in the early morning by военкомат. There'll be another 20, 50 other young recruits, young draftees, and they got on the bus, and then you go to a specific area in each big city, and then they will be waiting there for so-called buyers, покупатели. There'll be military officers showing up to take some guys with them for the military service. But that's the topic for my other video. Okay, so I hope, comrades, you enjoyed this video, maybe learned something new, and my special thanks to all my Patreon supporters. Thank you so much. I really appreciate your help. So today we're going to continue our journey through the topic of military draft in the Soviet Union. But before we begin, let's have a short lesson of Russian language and refresh a couple of important military terms related to the draft. Военкомат, or военный комиссариат. That's the draft office, which also served the function of mobilization office in the Soviet Union. Повестка, That's a draft notification that was delivered by hand. Призывник. So that's a draftee. So призыв is draft, and призывник, that's the person that got drafted. Проводы. So that's how we called going away party. So after you get your повестка, before you leave, all the relatives and friends get together and they party, celebrate, and give cash to the draftee. Проводы. Okay, kids. The lesson is over, and now back to our story about military draft in the Soviet Union. So the Soviet young men could get drafted in the spring or in the fall, depending when they turn 18. And usually it comes in the form of повестка that being delivered to your apartment or to your house. Then a specific date, which was specified in the draft notice, повестка, the draftee, призывник, had to show up by военкомат and then hop on the bus and go to so-called сборный пункт. So there's like gathering place. What's interesting, at this point, no one could tell the draftee where he gonna end up, at Army, Navy, or Air Force. Also, no one could tell you where you're gonna end up being shipped to. Could be Germany, could be Far East, could be Far North. No one could tell you at that point. And it's not like it was secret, it's just no one knew. The interesting detail that when you go to военкомат, you're gonna wear the oldest, the worst clothing and shoes that you own. If you bring along any nice shoes and nice clothing like jeans or whatever, along the way, or it's gonna get stolen, or the older soldiers will force you to give it up. So there was a smart idea to wear just bad old clothing when you go to the military service. And as I mentioned, on the bus or in the villages, it could be an open truck. Young draftees will be shipped to so-called сборный пункт, a collection point. In Kiev, сборный пункт was located on the opposite side of Kiev from where I lived, in Darnica, and it was called DVRZ. I knew that abbreviation for years. I never actually knew that it's the abbreviation of the factory located next to the gathering point. Это Darnitsky вагонно-ремонтный завод, so it's like a car train repair factory. So that's where we had that gathering spot in Kiev. And after you arrive to this сборный пункт, to this point, so there'll be, like in case of Kiev, it's a huge city, right? So there'll be maybe several hundreds of draftees every day at that place. And then you're going to wait for покупатели, for customers. That's how they call them. The officers that came to grab some draftees, they were called customers, покупатели, or buyers. Personally, I find it very strange that everything sounds so unorganized, but I actually talked to a couple of my friends who went through that process, and they confirm, yes. They say, like, me and my friend went together on a train, and we had no idea where we're going. We just went north. Then they told me to hop off the train in Belarus, and my friend continued the trip on the same train all the way to the Baltics. So, kind of strange, but that's how it worked. If you're interested in this topic of draft in Soviet Union, I would suggest to watch the movie called Команда 33, Team 33. This movie was made in 1987, so it's during Perestroika time, and they showed pretty much the whole process from kids getting draft notices, partying, проводы, getting to военкомат, getting on a train, and show their trip to their final destination, to their military unit. And while you're on a train, sometimes they will just, put you on a train car and you'll be mixed with regular passengers. But if they have a lot of draftees, they'll have just a separate train car with a couple of guards. They'll be watching each end so no one will run away, and they're just gonna attach that train car to the regular train. Another cute detail that the train attendants, проводники, so the people, everyone has like one train car in charge, they loved draftees because all they want to do was party, get drunk. So they will sell them vodka at double price or even higher, or they will trade vodka for their clothing. So if anyone had a nice jacket or nice pants, they could trade it for alcohol. So that's another kind of cute little detail about Soviet draft process. Another good Soviet movie on the topic of military draft, but this is like classic, more Soviet because it's from 1979. It's called Starshina. I'm not sure how to translate starshina into English, so that's like a military rank, which is one above private, I believe. So that's another good movie. And another movie called Весенний призыв, Spring Draft. So that's the three movies that I would suggest you guys to watch if you're interested in this topic. Весенний призыв, Spring Draft, Starshina, and Команда 33. Another particular interesting detail about military draft in the Soviet Union is that not everyone had to go through the boot camp, or we call it учебка. Like, for example, my father, he never attended any boot camps. He was just shipped on a train straight to Baltics, and he served there all 2.5 years as the guard. So he didn't need any training. Couple of my friends I talked to, same thing. They just were shipped straight into the military unit, and that's what he had his basic training. He actually never attended actual boot camp. But of course, if you're gonna do something more serious, if like you get assigned to the tank division or artillery or something like that, then you had to go to the boot camp for 6 months. One of the very famous boot camps in the Soviet Union was located in Ukraine, not far from Kiev, in Oster. And that was the boot camp that trained tank drivers, tank operators, and also artillery support and stuff like that. Okay, so let's learn the new word. Учебка. Boot camp. Учебка. Oster boot camp, Учебка, was famous for really hard, insane training. And there's a lot of this saying about Oster that not really complimentary. One saying goes like this. Лучше жопой сесть в костер, чем попасть служить в Остер. It's better to sit with naked ass in a fire pit than to serve in Остер. But of course it rhymes in Russian. Another one goes, те, кто служил в Остере, им не страшен Бухенвальд. Those who served in Oster boot camp, they won't be afraid of Buchenwald death camp. The stories I read about this Oster boot camp, Uchebka, it's crazy. Like, they made them fix beds every morning so precise, like it should be. They had a little tiny rope stretched, and every pillow, everything should be lined up precisely. They sometimes had to paint grass so it looks green. They made like a nice square snows. They brought snows by trucks in the winter to make it pretty for the New Year celebration, and a lot of crazy stuff like that. Another famous punishment was so-called cigarette butt funeral, akurak, похороны окурка. So if this officer finds the cigarette butt laying anywhere on the grass or on the blacktop, everyone will get together, and there will be this huge process of running for miles, carrying this cigarette butt. So all the soldiers will be punished, and then they're gonna make them dig this huge hole that the tank can park. They're gonna lay down the cigarette butt, then they're gonna bury it. Then officer said, did you line up the cigarette butt correctly? It should be north-south, not any other way. So they'll make them dig that hole back up again, find that cigarette butt, line it up perfectly north to south, and then bury it again. So that was another punishment. If anybody will, so soldiers will quickly learn how not to drop cigarette butts here and there. And of course, there's going to be a lot of regular military training, a lot of running, miles and miles of running in full gear, with gas masks on. And during the run, they'll say, "Spishka sprava," so flash to the right, so like nuclear explosion to your right. So everyone needs to drop on their faces and lay flat to the left. Or if it's a flash from the left, you jump and fall off the road to the right. And so a lot of drilling, then of course dealing with weapons and all that stuff. When I was getting ready for this video, I read some stories. A guy wrote his memories about serving those 6 months in Oster Uchebka, this boot camp, and he recalled that whatever they fed them with created horrible heartburn. He said, this all I remember, all 6 months, horrible heartburn, whatever they added, some margarine or something else in their foods. So everyone was swallowing the cigarette ashes to take care of the heartburn, so there was no pills. And then, of course, when 6 months is up, then you're a qualified Soviet soldier. You got your quals as a tank driver or cannon operator, whatever, and then you get shipped out to your final destination for the remainder of your 2 years. In this case, this guy got shipped to Germany. What was wild about his story, that he finished his training in April of 1986, and he got shipped out to Germany on April 24, 1986, 2 days before Chernobyl power plant exploded. So I was in Kiev, close by. He was in Oster. It's pretty close, not far away from Kiev. And he got so lucky, because if he'd be still in that boot camp, 100% he'll be shipped to Chernobyl to help with cleaning up after that disaster. Okay, so this concludes our mini-series, First Steps of Becoming a Soviet Soldier. As I mentioned earlier, there's a couple videos already made before. One, it's called just like that, First Steps of Becoming a Soviet Soldier. Another one is Military Draft in the USSR. So if you didn't see those yet, check them out. If you think this topic is interesting, let me know. I can make more videos about actual military service in different parts of the USSR. Once again, I want to say thank you so much to all my Patreon supporters. Your help is greatly appreciated. Thank you, guys. Well, if you made it all the way to the end of this long and boring video, thank you so much. I appreciate that. You can always support my work at patreon.com, PayPal, or you can just buy my book. Говорит и показывает Москва. Московское время 15 часов. В эфире программа Ushanka Show. Hello, comrades, and welcome back to Ushanka Show. My name is Sergey, and I was born in the USSR. As we continue to discuss the final years of the Soviet Union, so we're talking end of the 80s, I would like to pause for a second and talk a little bit more about education. Because in May of 1988, I graduated from the 10th grade, so that's like a Soviet high school, and I was getting ready for my next big step, getting admitted to the college. And you should know by now that most Soviet children went to school for 10 years. So for example, I began first grade in September of 1978 at the age of 7. And as I mentioned, I graduated from the 10th grade 10 years later in May of 1988. And I also mentioned earlier that about 50% of my class left school after 8th grade, and most of them went to work or they entered some kind of trade school, ПТУ, профессиональное техническое училище, or technicum. So graduating from the school is always exciting, right? But it presented new challenges. Those challenges were mostly for the boys because you get your high school diploma at the age of 17 in the spring, and at the age of 18 you become eligible for military draft. So guys like me had quite a short window to make your next move, otherwise you're gonna end up in the Soviet army. And of course, if you were excited to serve your motherland, no problem, just wait till you turn 18 and you get drafted. But most guys from my generation, at least in Kiev and around my friends, they all considered it would be just a huge waste of your time, of your youth, to spend 2 years in military service. The easiest and the most popular, of course, way of dodging the draft would be to get into college that had so-called военная кафедра, military department. That way, you not get drafted while you're in that college, and then you become an officer of reserve after you graduate. But not every college in the Soviet Union had this military department, военная кафедра. So if you go to the regular college, they will snatch you on your second year and you go into the army service anyways. And another challenge, of course, that you need to understand that even if you had free education in the Soviet Union, you couldn't just go to any college. You had to pass the entry exams, and depending how many people were trying to get in, as harder the competition, the higher scores they required. So you want to make sure you go somewhere that you will pass and you become a student. So here's the example. So my friend Igor, he grew up in a different city, Chernigov, but we spent every summer together during the summer breaks in a village in northern Ukraine. In order to avoid military service, he actually went to western Ukraine in the town of Ivano-Frankovsk to become a student of Institut Nefti y Gaza, so the College of Oil and Gas Exploration, although he never ever had any interest in drilling for oil or gas. But since that college wasn't that high popular, not in demand, their проходной ball, so their entry score was pretty low, so he managed to pass entry tests, got on that college, got his degree, and dodged military service successfully. Another friend of mine, Andrei, we went to school together, same class, and he was actually the smartest guy in our class. He got that silver medal. He had every grade was A except one was B. He went a different route. He went to Moscow and tried to get into the МГИМО, Moskovsky Государственный институт международных отношений. So it's a Moscow, pretty much university for international relationships. That's where you get education to become a diplomat. And that is a crazy hard thing to do, extremely high entry score, and he didn't make it first time. So in 1988, he didn't pass the entry test. I mean, he did pass them, but he didn't score high enough. And of course, military doesn't care. So they drafted him next year, and he spent 2 years somewhere middle of nowhere, Belarus, in military service. And only after coming back from military service, he managed to get into that college. Similar situation happened to another friend of mine, Dima. He wanted to be a doctor. He didn't pass entry test in 1988, got drafted, spent 2 years in army. Actually, at least he had some connections. His mother did, blood, right? And he was sent to Moscow. He spent 2 years in military service in Moscow. I think he participated in events of 1991, August Putsch of 1991, and only after coming back, he managed to get into the medical college and become a doctor. Another friend of mine, Valera, had a kind of totally different situation. He came from the family of professional military people. Like his father was a military officer, his uncle, his grandpa, and so on. So he ended up going into the military college. But the problem was that his health wasn't that great. He constantly had horrible headaches. So I think he wouldn't be able normally to pass the medical exam to get into the military college to become an officer, but his father managed to pull some strings. So he got into the college right here in Kiev, военное училище, they call it. So my friend became a cadet of the military college here in Kiev, and that was a училище ПВО, противовоздушной обороны, anti-aircraft defense college. And to be anti-aircraft missiles officer was probably one of the most prestigious military jobs in the Soviet Army, because you'll be regularly stationed in Germany, in Hungary, so on the outskirts of the Warsaw Pact. So you're going to live outside the Soviet Union and you're going to get access to good stuff. So that was a good job at that time. Unfortunately for my friend, when he graduated out of that college, Soviet Union already was gone. So instead of going to Eastern Germany, he had to go middle of nowhere border between Russia and Ukraine. So his military career was not that good. Yeah, he definitely missed the boat because, for example, even his father, he spent a year in Kuwait. Apparently in the late 80s, Soviet Union sold to Kuwait a bunch of anti-air missiles and systems. So they sent officers with the equipment to teach local military personnel how to operate the Soviet systems. But let's return to the main character of the story, Comrade Sergei Sputnikov. Well, first of all, I didn't need to worry about being drafted because back in high school, when we had our initial military training, начальная военная подготовка, as a part of it, we went through the medical testing, and my eyesight was so poor that I was already automatically not eligible for draft. So I knew that I won't go into military. Actually, that time was upsetting. Later on, I was like, damn, I'm so lucky. Actually, I want to join Navy, Soviet Navy, of course, I don't know, just sounded so romantic, sunsets and sunrises on the ocean, visiting different ports and stuff like that. So that sounded great. And my romantic Navy bubble got popped only several years later when I met an ex-Navy guy in my college. And of course, I was starting asking all these questions. How was his service? And in Soviet Navy, you go for 3 years. Army, 2 years. Navy, 3 years. So I listened to his stories. Everything was just so interesting. And he showed pictures and, photos of there's a military United States jet spying on us. This is us visiting the ports. And then he mentioned about the bathrooms, toilets on a ship and that had handles. And I was like, why do you need handles in a toilet? And he's like, dude, if it's storming, you can fall in the hole when you squat over the hole, because that's how you go to the bathroom. And I was like, oh, and I'd instantly killed any romantic feelings about Navy. And also I want to mention that my generation, people born in 1971, 72, got very lucky because of Afghan war was pretty much at its final stage. The war that began in 1979 lasted all the way till 1989, but they started withdrawing troops from Afghanistan in May of 1988. So my generation, guys of my age, that's when they become drafted in spring of 1988. So that time they hardly took any troops in Afghanistan. They were just removing the troops. So my generation skipped that nightmare. And I want to point out to another quite interesting detail. So my father, who was born in 1946 and got drafted into the Soviet Army back in 1964, he claimed that back in his day, there was a lot of pride about being drafted to military service. And then if for some reason you didn't serve, even girls will be staying away from you because there's something wrong with the guy if he didn't serve in the army, like some medical conditions or mental conditions. So if you want to be a popular dude, you need to go to military service. So that was in 60s. But of course, you need to keep in mind that he grew up in the village, so probably city boys had different attitude toward army service versus village people. And now, 25 years later, my generation, I hardly knew anyone who actually wanted to go and serve. I believe one guy, he really wanted to go to be a paratrooper. Otherwise, most of my friends did everything possible to dodge the military service, mostly through going to those specific colleges. So despite the massive government propaganda, my generation wasn't buying this. It's your sacred duty for the motherland to serve in the military forces and try to avoid it at all costs. Okay, and now back to my story. What was going on with Comrade Sergei back in 1988? Unfortunately, my family wasn't involved much with my future career. I didn't get any advice. They just pretty much trusted me with my decision about college. Looking back, I wish my mother was more proactive and pushed me towards journalism, because she saw that since I was 11, I was writing stories, I was corresponding with many people, I was writing articles for the newspapers, kept keeping diaries, so definitely I wasn't hiding it, so I wish she pushed me towards that field. Especially in the Kiev University, they had a journalism department where you could take courses and become a journalist, but unfortunately it didn't happen. And probably I was myself not brave enough, because I knew there was a lot of competition for that specific field, so I never even attempted or never thought about it. To make matters worse, I actually had no idea what I wanted to do. I had no specific hobbies except, keeping diaries and writing stories. So I had no clue what to do. That's kind of another serious problem. So even if I didn't have concerns about being drafted in the army, I still, with your grades, you're supposed to go to college and become an engineer or something like that. So that was an obvious thing. And what's funny, I actually had a really good advice from my cousin, Tanya. She's on this picture on the right. I mean, it's an old photo. I'm still a tiny kid. But she suggested that if you want to have a good life in Soviet Union, I mean, it's still 1988. No one thought that we have only 3 years left for the USSR. You need to get some kind of profession close to the food. So Tanya suggested for me to go to the same college that she graduated from, Institut Легкой промышленности. So that's like Institute of Light Industry. You know, heavy industry, of course, it's metallurgy, coal and stuff, and light industry will be food, producing, making foods, and also like clothing, shoes. So that's a light industry. So we had college like that to make engineers in light industry. So I went there. I picked, according to her advice, like a manufacturing and designing food processing equipment, fakultet they call it. So I went and filed the paperwork, and they checked my, of course, grades from school, as well as my медицинская справка, so it's like a medical condition document that tells you about my health. And that's when they told me the bad news. Apparently, there was a special, I don't know how to call it, chart, and there was like, based on my eyesight, and I had poor eyesight, there was only specific colleges I could attend, so I couldn't go to the food processing department, but they said you can't go to our college period because of your poor eyesight. And I was like, well, where can I go? And they looked and they say, it looks like you can go to Kiev Polytechnical Institute. And Kiev Polytechnical Institute, of course, it's technical. So, and it's a old, famous Ukrainian college. If you know Sikorsky, the founder and the designer of Sikorsky helicopter. So Igor Sikorsky, he actually graduated from the Kiev Polytechnical Institute, of course, way back in the early 1900s. I had only two options available with my eyesight, and Polytechnical Institute was a electrical equipment engineer or welding equipment engineer. And I was like, you gotta be kidding me. I have a bad eyesight, but I'm okay to work designing welding equipment? They're like, sorry, this is what it says right here. So this is how I ended up getting my degree in electrical components and equipment. I became an engineer, although I had zero interest in that. Never was interested in electronics, but I became an electronics engineer just because of my poor sight and these weird Soviet bureaucratic limitations. And of course, if I had blood, remember that Soviet word blood, right connections, knowing the right people, I probably could push through and get into college I wanted to, maybe grease some palms and stuff like that, but unfortunately, I didn't have anything like that. So that's how I became a student of Kiev Polytechnical Institute back in 1988, graduated. And the smartest thing I'd done is while I was still in college, and we're talking about Soviet Union disappearing, Ukraine became independent, I started studying English language because I was like, okay, it's good to be engineer, but I'll be engineer with the fluent English. Then probably Motorola or General Electric or some other big foreign companies will come into Ukraine, and I will be ready and available to get a job there. But of course, things went completely different direction. If you read my book, American Diaries 1995, you know the story. I learned English, but I used it for getting into Camp Counselors USA program, came to America to work in the summer camps, had a blind date in 1998, and ended up settling down here in Southwest Michigan. Anyway, so there was my college story. If you guys made it all the way to this long and boring video, thank you so much. Today we're gonna take a look at some peculiar details about military service in the Soviet Union. But first of all, here's my official disclaimer. Comrades, I never served in the military. And of course, you may be a little bit surprised looking at this picture, but I want to tell you, it's not me. I mean, top left corner, that small black and white photo, it is me. But the main picture of this NATO soldier, it's not me. This picture that I show off here and there, it actually has a quite interesting history. One of my friend's father, he was a Soviet officer who subscribed to a magazine called Зарубежное военное обозрение. So it's like a foreign military review. And we loved that magazine. This magazine wasn't available in regular retail stores. It's only military personnel could subscribe to it, so we had a chance to look at it because my friend had access through his father, so we liked it a lot. It has photos and technical data of NATO tanks, NATO jets, American equipment. So that was the only source. I don't know why I found that information super interesting, but so that was the only source in the Soviet Union to learn anything about military equipment in other countries. And one day my friend called me and he's like, dude, they have a picture of you in this magazine. And I'm like, what magazine? He's like, Зарубежное военное обозрение, the Foreign Military Review. And he brought that magazine, showed me, and it's amazing. So that's my twin. The guy looks very similar to me. And they let me keep this picture, so I have it since 80s. And it's pretty cool, I think. It would be nice to find who was actually the person that picture was taken of. I apologize for that small detour, and now we're back to the topic of the military service in the Soviet Army. And our focus today will be unofficial conduct of operations in the Soviet military, so-called неуставные отношения, or some people call it дедовщина. We're going to look at that term. Дедовщина. Дедовщина. It's quite an interesting term which is really hard to translate into English. The word дедовщина comes from the word ded. Ded means grandpa, but it's also this unofficial term for the soldiers that served over year and a half in the military. So you have a total of 2 years of military service. When you hit 1.5 years of service, you become ded, you become grandpa. And this is about relations about these older soldiers towards young green soldiers. This is dedovщина. So when recruits, or in our case in Soviet Union draftees, when they arrive to the boot camp, учебка, or straight into military outfit, they get a nickname Duch. Duch you can translate as a spirit or the ghost. So you like no one, you are nobody, you don't exist, you're just a spirit, so you're a Duch. And since you're nobody, since you're a Duch, you're gonna be treated accordingly by the older soldiers. For example, upon your arrival, quite often your personal belongings will be searched and your money will be confiscated. Any goods like foodstuffs, candy that you brought from home will be confiscated. So it's a first introduction to your new military home and to your new friends. And of course, it's illegal and criminal to take away stuff of the other soldiers, regardless if you're new arrival or not. So this is a so-called dedovщина. This is неуставные отношения. This is relations that are not covered by the rules of conduct of the Soviet Army. Of course, such occurrences didn't happen everywhere. It depended a lot, of course, on the officers and also depended on the soldiers. For example, ask my father, who served in the Soviet Army in the 60s, did they have cases of dedovщина, and he said, not really. So we got lucky because we had a big group of Ukrainian village boys showed up in that military outfit in Baltics. So when the older soldiers were trying to harass them, they said we stood our grounds and didn't let them do anything to us. So in that case, my father has no stories about dedovщина during his military service. What I find extremely interesting is just even the way you dress, you can be recognized as a Duch or ded. We'll talk about ded later. So it's almost like gangs in Chicago, other cities, the way they wear hats, pants, your head is tilted to the left or to the right. Kind of similar was in the Soviet Army. Just looking at the picture of the soldier, you could tell that he is a new soldier or he is already by the end of his military service. Take a look at this cool photo taken sometimes in the 80s in East Germany, and there's two young soldiers standing next to the sign that shows NATO and USSR, and the slogan says, "Warrior, not soldier, warrior. Watch out, NATO is 200 kilometers away." Any person that served in the Soviet military, looking at that photo, could recognize right away that those two guys are the young soldiers. They're fresh, they still dukhy. If you're not familiar with Dedovshchina and this unofficial code of dress of the Soviet soldier, all you could tell that they are privates. They have SACA on their shoulders, which means Soviet Army, Sovietskaya Armia, and those two little, looks like axes, it's artillery, so it's two little cannons. So these two young soldiers are from artillery outfit in Germany. But let's take a look at their belts. You see how tight belts are? Like, it looks almost uncomfortable. This is the first sign these guys are dukhy. Like, the rule was I believe, like, you couldn't stick more than one finger. Like, if you can stick between the belt and your body more than 2 fingers, it's not tight enough. So those poor guys had to keep their belts super tight. Next clue, they buttoned up all the way. So pretty tight around the necks too. So that's another clue that these guys are dukhy. And another clue, if you look at their hats, we call them pilotka. I'm not sure what is the correct word in English for that military style hat, but you see how straight it is. It's not tilted any way. They have a short haircut as well. So if you're dukh, you're required your head should be straight without any angles. And of course, besides specific way you're supposed to be dressed when you dukh, when you just in the beginning of your military service, you're supposed to obey to your other soldiers. So as older the soldiers, more power he has above you. Technically, soldiers can tell each other, like order each other what to do, but of course in Dedovshchina situation this is happening all the time. So the job of these dukhy soldiers is shurshat, and you can translate like to scramble. So you will clean all their soldiers' shoes. You'll do their request like, hey, I need you to run and buy me a pack of cigarettes in the commissariat store, and you pay with your money. So you buy him cigarettes, you clean, you do all extra duties that all the soldiers don't do just because you're dukh. So this is what the Dedovshchina is about. And of course, if you refuse to obey, you're rebel, then you might be getting beat up, and quite often what will be practiced, they will punch you in your chest because you don't want to have, any marks on your face, so the officers won't get suspicious if they, pay attention. So usually they'll be hitting super hard in the person's chest to hurt him, to force him to do all their soldiers' bidding. And of course, you become officially a soldier when you perform prisyaga, so you read the special oath to the Soviet army and the Soviet people and Soviet governments. You're gonna fight and protect Soviet people to the last drop of your blood, and then you become officially a Soviet soldier. Okay, so your next level as a Soviet soldier from the dukh is so-called slon, and you translate it as an elephant. Some people think that the term slon, elephant, came from soldiers wearing gas masks, so there's trunks, so you look like an elephant, and actually we had a pretty good joke about that. So there's a little girl who is a Soviet officer's daughter. She can't sleep in the middle of the night. She's crying and whining. She's like, Daddy, Daddy, I want to see elephants. Daddy, Daddy, I want to see elephants. And she's like, sweetheart, elephants are tired. They're sleeping right now. She's like, I don't care. I want to see elephants, Daddy, right now. He's like, okay, fine. Platoon, everyone, get up. Chemical attack. Don your gas mask. Start running. So when you become a slon after 6 months of service, you kind of tell dukhy, the new arrivals, what to do. You become kind of like a transmitter. So older soldiers, they usually don't beat personally young ones. They tell slani, they tell elephants to take care of it. And of course, your uniform is a little bit not as tight. Your belt is a little bit more loose. You might have your top button is unbuttoned. So that's when you're elephant from 6 months to a year of service. The next level is so-called черпак. It's translated as scooper. So this is when the soldier crosses the line of 1 year of service. So from 1 year to 1 year and a half. So next 6 months you're a черпак. Okay, I quickly looked it up. So черпак translates as a dipper or ladle. So that's that big dipper spoon that you get soup out of the big pot. And I think because when you get officially and unofficially moved from elephant, from slon to черпак, they actually use a dipper to smack you in your ass 12 times because you serve for 12 months already and you become черпак, a dipper. Okay, the next level, and that's when you become a real man. It's when you become grandpa, you become ded. From when you serve for a year and a half up to 100 days before you leave the military, you get demobilized, right? Demobilizaция. So in that period, you become ded, grandpa, and that's the term dedovщина. So from 18 months to up to right at the 100 days before you get discharged, you are ded, you're grandpa. So when the soldier becomes ded, becomes grandpa, first thing, he will never clean again. He will never be cleaning bathrooms or sweeping floors. This is the job for ghosts, for duhi, or for elephants, for slani. When you're ded, when you're grandpa, no more cleaning for you. Also, there are many other perks, like you are first in line to get food. So didi first get the food, then after them will be черпаки, then slani, and duhi, the youngest, will be the last ones to get food. And of course, when you're ded, your uniform is going to look different. You're not supposed to wear a brand new uniform. It's for duhi. Yours should be worn, but nice and neat. And of course, belt is loose. You can let your hair grow a little bit longer. And a big deal is the way you start wearing your military hats. You really have them crazy way. So everyone see that you are ded. You're almost ready to leave the military. Of course, the grand finale of the military service in the Soviet army or fleet will be when you become дембель. From the period of 100 days, so a little bit over 3 months before your discharge order, so it's so-called 100 days before the order, 100 дней до приказа. That's when you're дембель, and you basically just take it easy. You don't do pretty much anything. You just, of course, if officers let you do it. And so all the younger soldiers do all your jobs for you, and you have different concerns now. One of the main projects for this дембель guys will be creating so-called дембельский альбом. So that's your discharge photo album. So they spend a lot of time and energy and money putting together pictures, illustrations, and other stuff that tells the story of your 2-year service in military. So дембельский альбом, дембель album is like a big deal. They really elaborate, really cool, and they spend a lot of time making them, or the young soldiers help to make them. And of course, there are tons of stories about crazy stuff that these older soldiers, дембели, force young soldiers, duhi, to do for them. One called дембельский поезд. So this is like this guy, the дембель guy, wants to imagine he's on a train going home. So 4 young soldiers will pick up his bed, and they'll be shaking it and making it sounds like it's a train, while outside the building, there'll be other young soldiers running past the window with branches. So if you look out of the window, it looks like there's a train moving because, trees are moving past the window and the bed being shaken, and those poor souls are making sounds like it's a train. Another story is like some young soldier will be in charge of providing this personalized cigarettes for every day for this 100 days before the discharge order. So he will write really carefully with tiny letters on the cigarette that this is 99 days before the discharge cigarette, 98 days. So every day it'll be brand new cigarette with a small writing like best wishes, and this is, you have 95 days left, for example, before you get discharged. And then of course there'll be a day when you're officially discharged from your military service. And you know, when I was getting ready for this video and gather information, there's a lot of people mentioned the fact that the day when I walked out of the military base and became civilian again, said that was the happiest day of my life. And he's like, I know it sounds bad, like, yeah, I had other happy moments like the birth of my children and so on, but he said that was pretty much the happiest day of my life, is when you're finally out of the doors and you're done with your military service. So this is a quick and dirty kind of overview of the military service in the Soviet Union, unofficial kind of way. So let's do a quick refresher. So you start as a Dukh, ghost, that's up to 6 months. Then you become Slon, elephant, from 6 months to 1 year of your service. Then next level is a Cherpak, dipper, from 1 year to 18 months. Next you become Ded, grandpa, from 18 months to 100 days before your discharge. And the final stage is 100 days before you're being discharged, you become Dembil. Well, I hope you enjoyed this video and maybe learned something new. And as always, thank you so much for everyone who supports my work with patreon.com. It's greatly appreciated. Большое спасибо.